Hello and welcome. My name is Victor Gijsbers and I teach philosophy at Leiden University in the Netherlands. In this series of videos, I will be looking at one of the most famous books of Western philosophy, the early 17th century book called Meditations on First Philosophy, written by René Descartes. The Meditations on First Philosophy, usually just known as the Meditations or Descartes' Meditations, are still among the most widely read books of philosophy. That is due to at least two reasons. The first is that it was massively influential. René Descartes himself has often been called like the father of modern philosophy, and although we shouldn't take that kind of phrase too seriously, it is certainly true that Descartes' philosophy in general and the Meditations specifically played an enormously important role in the changes in philosophy that took place in the 17th century and that, to a certain extent, created philosophy as we know it today. And some of the ideas that we find in the Meditations, ideas for instance about the relation between mind and body, or about the nature of knowledge, are still very interesting to philosophers today, and those too are reasons that people read the book. But I think a second reason that the Meditations are so widely read is that they are quite accessible. Descartes almost takes us on a kind of story trip. He sort of begins by setting out the scene. This guy who is sitting in a chair and who starts doubting everything in order to finally build up a good philosophy. In 6 so-called Meditations, Descartes takes us from a guy sitting in a chair to the position where we have according to Descartes at least, a correct view of the nature of the world, the nature of knowledge, the nature of mind, and so on and so forth. And this is a book that is not very long, that is very, very rich in content, and that is quite accessible, at least in the sense that you can sort of easily get through it, especially if you compare it to some other famous works of philosophy like Kant's Critique of Pure Reason or Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, which you cannot get through easily. On the other hand, the ease with which at least some parts of the Meditations can be read is also sort of hides an incredible complexity. An incredible complexity that means that commentators today, people reading Descartes and writing about Descartes, have found an almost infinite number of controversies about what Descartes means, what he is doing, what the point of it is, whether he succeeds, and so on and so forth. So even though you might be able to get into the text relatively easily, that does not mean, and I cannot stress this enough, that does not mean that the text is simple or easy to understand. So what I want to do in this series of videos is I want to take you on a trip through the Meditations. And I will be zooming in on certain topics that I think are either especially important for the general structure of the Meditations or are especially interesting because they allow us to see something about how Descartes does philosophy, or how we should do philosophy, or how we should approach old texts like these. So I actually start by reading I start my course in Leiden that I've been teaching for 3 years now, my course on the history of modern European philosophy, by reading the first 4 Meditations with my students. And in fact, some of the videos that you will see in this series are videos that I made a year earlier than the video I'm making right now, in the autumn of 2020, precisely for that course. So the first 8 videos in which I really talk about the specific Meditations will be videos from my course. And well, I start with that text because it's chronologically early on in the period I'm talking about in the course, History of Modern European Philosophy. It is from the beginning of the 17th century, and this course is about the 17th and the 18th century. But I also start with this text because I think it offers such a great opportunity for learning how to do philosophy. Learning how to do at least the history of philosophy, but also learning how to do the history of philosophy in a sense that is itself doing philosophy. Because you want to approach these texts in a particular way, right? You want to approach them in a way that allows you to really learn from them. that allows you to really get from the text not just what you expect to find in it because of all the things that you may have already heard or read or whatever, but that allows you to get from the text what is there and what you maybe do not expect. And those things, the things that you do not expect, and the questions that you didn't have before you came to the text, those are often the most interesting things. And so one of the things I hope to achieve in reading the meditations with you, I'm not going to try to be comprehensive. I'm not going to try to, to talk about everything that happens in the meditations. That wouldn't be possible in the number of lectures that I'm going to spend on it. But I do hope to achieve, to give you an idea of how to approach texts like these and how even very small parts of such a text can generate very intriguing and very large questions. So, having said that, I would say that the accessibility of the meditations and the fact that it can be used to sort of experience how to read philosophy makes it a very good text also for beginners in philosophy. So this course, I teach it to first-year students. I think it's an excellent series of lectures to watch if you haven't read that much philosophy, although I suspect that if you have read a lot of philosophy, you might still learn something from it. All right, what will I be using? Well, I won't be using the original of Descartes' text because the original of Descartes' text is in Latin, and I do not know about your Latin, but my Latin is a little bit rusty. So what I will be using is a translation. It is a translation that I take from this book, which I recommend my students to buy. It is called Modern Philosophy, an Anthology of Primary Sources, edited by Roger Ariu and Eric Watkins. But, it just contains different translations made by different people, which are also available on their own, I believe. And in this case, the translation of the meditations that is used is the translation by Donald Kress. So we are using the translation by Donald Kress. Now, you do not have to use that translation, right? I will be reading out passages from the meditations, but if you have a different translation of the meditations, maybe not even in English, but in another language, you'll be able to find those passages, right? It won't be hard. The meditations is not very thick. If I read out something and I tell you that it's in the second meditation, you will be able to locate it. Okay, so don't worry too much about exactly which translation you are using. Final sort of practical thing I want to say is that the videos that I made last year were made with different equipment than the equipment I have right now, especially when it comes to the microphone, and that means that the audio quality might be a bit lower than that of a lot of other videos, or at least the more recent videos on my channel. I hope that you will enjoy the meditations together with me and that you will learn a lot of philosophy.